This is another archival upload of my previous mix critique videos. Again, I apologize for the vertical format that this video is about to switch to. This is 56 through 60. This track was sent in by Phil. Let's check it out. So right away, I am getting a lot of good low end out of the kick drum, but I'm not hearing any bass guitar at all. You have that like 60 hertz thump out of the kick, but it sounds like we're missing a lot of information between like 80 hertz and like 160 hertz. Also, the drum performance is not super tight, especially where the kick's landing. You can hear some hesitation there in a lot of spots. The vocals sound good, but the background vocals definitely need to be compressed tighter and brought up a little bit so they cut through around the lead vocal. Honestly, yeah, that kick drum is kind of overpowering everything else, and the snare is just buried behind everything else. That clean guitar there, it doesn't sound like it's actually an acoustic. It almost sounds like an acoustic emulation pedal. But whatever that cleaner guitar sound there is, that is clipping really badly. All right, Phil, so not bad overall. Like the tones sound halfway decent. I think the biggest things are your drum levels need to be fixed. Your kick is way too loud. The snare is way too quiet. I think those just in general need to be mixed better. The drum performance is really sloppy in a lot of places. I can barely hear the bass at all. Like you're missing a lot in the low mids, specifically from the bass. And honestly, I think the whole mix overall needs to be hit harder with compression on the mix bus. This track was sent in by George. Let's check it out. That kick is super muddy. Every time it hits, it's just adding a ton of low end in places that it shouldn't be. And it has absolutely none of that high end click to make it really cut through the mix. It sounds like you boosted the low end of it a lot in an attempt to make it cut through more, but really to make a kick cut through everything else, you need a lot more high end than low end, because the amount of low end you added is just muddying up the whole track. And that snare sounds a whole lot like a sample. It sounds like it's hitting the exact same way every single time. There's nothing wrong with using samples, but try to make it sound a little bit more realistic than it does. The guitars sound a lot like you must have scooped a bunch of the mid-range out, because it sounds muddy and harsh at the same time. So it sounds like you just scooped a ton out of the mid-range. Like you need to take some of that harsh high end out of it and some of the mud out of that guitar. Actually, it might not be the guitar itself that's muddy, it might be the bass that's muddy. Sounds like you've lifted the bass a lot, probably in an attempt to combat the harsh high end of the guitar. All right, George, so the overall mix, it seems like it's kind of a little closer to the black metal side of things, which if that's what you're going for, that's fine. But what I'm hearing is a whole lot of mud throughout the entire track. And then the guitar has a whole lot of the harsh high end. That does not sound good. It's making the guitar sound painful rather than the pleasant version of that upper mid-range bite. This track was sent in by Lawrence. First of all, that riser went on for way too long. Like, risers should be a very short little lift. When we actually get into the track, I do not like that guitar tone. The guitar has zero low end left. That's all just high mids and a ton of the harshness of it. It sounds thin and harsh, and it's just not good. Also, your snare is buried in the mix. I can barely hear it. I can hear the kick pretty well, but I would like a little more high-end attack out of the kick as well. But the snare is really buried. The cymbals, just like the guitars, you're getting a lot of harsh high-end frequencies. It's probably that 3.5 to 5K range. Yeah, I just had to pull up a frequency analyzer for a second just to make sure. And yeah, you have nothing between 500 hertz and 2K. Like, there's just a massive dip in that whole area. That's the area of the track that people want to hear the most. That like 500 to 1K range, you should pretty much not touch at all. And then the 1 to like 2.5K range, that's where all the attack of a guitar should be. But instead you have this massive boost around 4K, and it's just, you gutted the important part of the track and boosted the lows and the highs in places you shouldn't have. This track was sent in by Ty. Ty, you're missing a lot of that like 1 to 2.5K bite out of the guitars. Instead, you've boosted them way higher. It sounds like you got like 3.5 to 5K range boosted in the guitars, and that's just very harsh, painful frequency. That's not where you would normally want to boost a guitar. I'm not saying that you would never boost in that range, but for the most part, you're going to be wanting to boost in the 1 to 2.5K range for the guitars. Same thing with the vocals. It sounds like he scooped a bunch of the mid-range out of the vocals as well. And the bass, if there even is bass, is inaudible. Like, I absolutely cannot hear any bass guitar in this track whatsoever. The kick actually sounds really good. You got a decent amount of low end in it, and you got a lot of the upper mid attack in it. That's great. But everything else, even the snare sounds thin. It sounds like you're missing low end in the snare. But everything else, it sounds like you scooped out between like 600 hertz and like 2K, and then you boosted a ton in like the 3 to 5K range. It's thin, it's harsh, it's not pleasant to listen to. From a songwriting perspective, it's all right, but literally just everything sounds super thin and harsh. Like, you got some low end, but you could definitely use a little bit more, and you just gotta not cut out so much of the mid-range like you did here. And you gotta not boost so much of those harsh upper mid frequencies. It's painful to listen to. Stop cutting the mid-range, guys. Stop. This track was sent in by Court. Let's check it out. Pretty solid overall so far. I'm missing a little bit of low end. I could definitely get some more sub out of the kick. I also need a little more, probably right around 100 hertz from the bass. And the cymbals are probably a little too high. They're just kind of getting washy over the top. It's just a little too much on those. Yeah, so I don't normally recommend mixing with a frequency analyzer as a reference, but I just use it in the mix critiques, basically to confirm that I'm hearing what I'm hearing. And what this is showing me is exactly that, is that kind of everything below 200 it's at a good level comparatively to each other, but everything below 200 just needs to come up overall compared to the rest of the mix. Alright, in this section, I'm kind of losing the vocals a little bit. I get because there's a little bit more of a melodic guitar in the background for parts of it, and that's supposed to cut through more, but you got to find more of a balance between that more melodic guitar and the vocals, because it just feels like the vocals are getting drowned out. Alright, so good things first. Great songwriting. It's a fantastic song. The guitar tones are really, really good. I love that guitar sound. The vocals sound great. I need a little more out of the low end, so like everything below 200 hertz needs to come up a little. The cymbals are a little overpowering, and honestly, the cymbals and the guitar seem to be competing with the vocal for a good portion of the track.